Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Ineptus Astartes. This is part 2 of our look at Blackshields, and I am excited to talk to you about some combinations that I think will be useful for you as you begin to plan specifically how you want your Blackshields to function on the table. We're going to go through the oaths and talk about how some of them work together, get a little bit more specific than the previous overview about some of these combinations, and talk about some of the complexities that are going to go into specific list building, and then also give you some ideas maybe at the end about a couple of combinations that would be fun for lore purposes. So to start off, a couple of Blackshield observations, things to remember about running this group, running this list. Because you're a Blackshield, you are a legion unto yourself. You only have access to the main Legionis Astartes entries, so that's no unique troops from any of the legions, and you never get to take a rite of war. Instead, you get to take these 2 oaths, which are going to change the way your list plays. Because they count as distrusted if they're allies, that means that they can never, even if they're troops with line, they never score if they're part of the allied detachment. And if you take them as their main detachment and you bring an ally with them, then whatever they're allied with also counts as distrusted towards them. So they can never be, there's scoring limitations no matter what. So if you bring them in your allied detachment, basically you're going to be using them as kill units or things to attack things. And if you bring them in the primary, you need to make sure you're bringing lots of scoring just with your Blackshields alone, unless you have 1 or 2 other options in the oaths to try to make up these victory point problems. Most of the oaths are assault focused, and so, along with your advanced reaction. So this is going to default towards an assault army, but that doesn't mean it's not going to shoot at all, which we'll talk about in a bit. Despite the fact that it's assault focused, it's very limited in its access to weapon skill 5, which is of course a huge barrier in this game, in this edition, with weapon skill 5 when attacking into a weapon skill 4. The weapon skill 4 attacking up only hits on a 5+, so you need your weapon skill 5. The only thing in this list outside of characters, consuls, or, praetor or whatever, is veterans, command squads, and dreadnoughts. That's it for weapon skill 5. So you're probably going to end up leaning on your veterans for your strongest melee threats, which of course is an issue in a bit of ways, because veterans are not like top-notch at this time. But can we make them top-notch? Maybe we can. So to start off, I'm going to organize things in a couple different ways. To begin with, I'm going to talk about all of the oaths that are available, and I've sort of divided them up into 3 categories here for you. You've got the ones that have a major effect on the way the game is played, the ones that have moderate effect, whether that's because the rules are not quite as strong as the major effects, maybe they don't change quite as much, or they only apply in certain circumstances. And then the narrative flair ones are ones that, they don't have a huge impact, they aren't as strong, or perhaps they don't necessarily connect with a lot of other things. Now, some of these are going to change a little bit, and we're going to pay attention to the fact that when we're talking about including Blackshields, we're actually encouraged to not bring them at a full 3,000 points, because narratively it makes a little bit less sense for them to be in such massed numbers. So when you start talking about them as allies instead of a main troop, they actually change a little bit in some of their overall effect. So for example, in the first one, for my major effects, I would call the Penopoly of Old, which is giving you access to war gear, the Broken Helix, which has 2 variations which change major stats, Weapons of Desperation, which changes the entirety of your bolter or pistol access, and then the Flesh is Weak, which is a change to unit type, and then also a Feel No Pain and some other stuff. Those are huge changes in effects. The moderate effects, Eternal Vendetta, a +1 to hit against a specific legion is pretty great, but it is not as big in several situations because, unless you're changing it every game, which you probably shouldn't be as far as narrative goes, it's not going to come into effect a lot of the time. Spoils of Victory has a pretty moderate effect in which you are getting victory points every time your opponent runs away and you don't sweeping advance because you're not allowed to. Legacy of Nikeah does have a change on how the game works, but it's largely targeted towards sergeants and independent characters. In Disgrace, all are equal, and Pride is our armor really messes with your force organization chart to mix things up, so those have big effects as well, but they also have pretty sizable drawbacks in certain ways. Now, when you're looking at things in the allied situation, though, some of these become quite a bit more powerful. So, for example, the broken Helix, I think, gets stronger, at least the aberrant version gets stronger when you're talking about an allied detachment because of big limitation that comes along with this, in which your anti-tank ranged weapons, strangely enough, are not going to be super strong, but your melee is going to be great. Similarly, in Disgrace, all are equal is pretty great when you're talking about being in an allied detachment where you don't have a lot of points to fill things out, and so you miss out less on spending a lot of points on HQ units, which are taken away from you. And then similarly, a Pride is our armor in an allied detachment where you can avoid taking a real troop tax. This one becomes a little bit stronger. Okay, so let's get into some of the specifics here, and we'll talk about some of my observations and what I think you should do. We're going to start with one that I have 100% changed my mind on from the last time, which is Weapons of Destruction. Okay, so Weapons of Destruction states that you must replace all of your bolters and bolt pistols that you come stock with, and you have to replace them with a whole list of items and weapons, okay? Now, this does not interfere with unit upgrades, so specifically, like, if you're a veteran squad and you could swap out your bolter for a plasma gun, for example, you're still able to swap the bolter out for the plasma gun. It's essentially like this transition away or taking away the bolt gun happens, I guess, after in terms of order. So you can't start the game with a bolter, but as you're doing your list building, you can replace those items and swap them out. You can also keep the bolter, for example, if you want to choose an upgrade that attaches to that bolter. For example, a bayonet. But, you know, like, I don't necessarily see that being a hugely... There's not a lot of reasons to want to do that, okay? For the biggest effect on this one, because you do swap out both your pistol and your bolter, you want to target squads that have both a main rifle, a bolter, and a pistol, which is tactical squads, veteran squads, command squads, destroyers, recons, scouts, and, strangely enough, breachers, which is pretty cool. So when thinking about making this list work, or this concept work, I'm going to cut specifically to the quick of it, okay? You get access to some auto weapons, and you also get some las weapons. Your assault weapons that you could use, which are now going to be things like shotguns, stub carbines, and las carbines, instead of counting as assault weapons, they now count as pistol weapons, okay? So if it was assault 3, it's now a pistol 3. If it was assault 2, it's now a pistol 2. If your weapon was a rapid-fire weapon, like an auto rifle or a las gun, instead of being rapid-fire, it also counts as a pistol 2. Now, why does this matter? Well, it matters because you can fire 2 pistols. And so before, well, you could only fire one of those weapons. You can fire both of them at the same time in the shooting phase. So, for example, a bolter and bolt pistol marine, when replaced, if you give them, and these are going to be my 2 suggestions for the mass amount, stub carbines, each marine has 6 shots, which are at strength 3 only, but at 12-inch range, or the las gun and auto rifle, which is 4 shots at 24 inches. In addition, you can have a free heavy stubber, 1 for every 3 models in that squad, which you will take in some situations, but not in others. And not mentioned on the slide here, of course, are the shotguns, which are also strength 3, 12-inch range, but they have concussive. We'll get to that in a second. Okay, so we're going to assume for the basic breakdown here that we're talking about a ballistic skill 4, and you're shooting with a 10-man squad. So at the range that they can fire, which is 12 inches of range, a stub carbine is going to, against a toughness 4, put out 13 and 1/3 wounds, which is pretty darn efficient. Now, because it's strength 3 only, you cause 0 wounds to toughness 7. And let me take a second to explain why I'm talking about it in this terms. Basically, in this game, there are breakpoints of importance around toughness 4, because that's the toughness of Marines, which are going to be the majority of the units that you face in this game, probably. And then toughness 7, because Contemptors are still a terrifying boogeyman, and they are toughness 7, and so you have to know how to kill both Marines, and you have to know how to kill Contemptors. So 0 wounds against Contemptors, which we'll see in a second is not... It sounds bad, and it is bad, I guess, but it's not that much of a downgrade towards what you were having before. Less damage, auto guns or las rifles, which I would mix and match them if I were styling them or if I'm putting them on my units. But they have the same stat line of AP dash, strength 3, 24-inch range. But because now instead of being rapid fire weapons at 24-inch range, they become 24-inch pistols with 2 shots each. The autoguns and las rifles put out 8 and 5/6 wounds on toughness 4 and 0 on toughness 7. Now, when we compare that to bolters, the same 10-man squad firing a bolter at 24 inches puts out 3 1/3 wounds or 1 wound at toughness 7. And then, of course, at 12 inches, you essentially just double that because you have twice as many shots because bolters are rapid-fire weapons. So at 12 inches, it's 6 2/3 wounds, and then approximately 1 to 1 2/3 wounds on a Contemptor. So with a Contemptor's 2+ save, that still is almost no effective damage, but it is more than statistically 0 because strength 3 for the stub carbines and the autoguns, las rifles, cannot actually harm a Contemptor. However, what's important to note, there's a couple things. Part of the reason why the stub carbines and the autoguns are so much better than the bolters is because you can fire both of them because the stub carbines and the autoguns or las rifles count as pistols, whereas the bolter is a rapid-fire weapon. And you can only fire one gun. On top of that, because it is a rapid-fire weapon, it is not an assault weapon, you can't even charge after you shoot with this thing. So statistically, right here from this, even if this is all we did, considerably more damage, and saves for someone to make with these layouts. Now, the next question is, what should you be doing with those other options? Are there any others that are worth considering? I'm going to tell you that I would take a look at adding heavy stubbers and shotguns into these mixes. So when do we take them and why? Okay, heavy stubbers are assault. The biggest problem here is that you lose out on the dual pistols thing because heavy stubbers start off as heavy weapons and move to assault, which means you can't fire 2, which is fine. You lose out on the dual pistol, but they have a higher strength. They have 1 more shot, so you're only losing 1 shot per person. 2 las guns fire 4 shots, 1 heavy stubber fires 3. 1 more strength, though, means you're wounding more consistently, and you have 36-inch range. A single heavy stubber causes 1 wound against T4, 1/3 of a wound against toughness 7 within 36 inches. And again, when you compare that to the same amount of shots per auto las or stub carbine, it's a little bit worse than the stub carbines by 1.3 wounds to 1 wound, and better than the 2 auto or las, which is from 0.88 to 1 wound. And then, of course, the heavy stubber is the only one who's capable even of causing a wound against a Contemptor. Now, shotguns are interesting as well because shotguns start out as assault, which means they also become pistols. So they become pistol 2, and they cause concussive checks. Now, a trooper with a shotgun, 1 trooper with a shotgun causes 0.888 repeating wounds against toughness 4, and again 0 wounds against toughness 7, which is the exact same as an auto las combo within 12 inches. It causes 1/2 of a wound less than the stub carbine, but the stub carbine has no concussive. Now, notably here, the heavy stubber, you can only take 1 for 3, so that's all the more you're ever going to take in one of these squads. The shotguns, though, you could fill the whole squad with them. However, you're not going to do that because you don't need to. The biggest benefit of the shotgun is the concussive test. Concussive as a check happens at the end of a phase, not after a Teton attack is finished. So, like, let's say if the concussive attack, which, by the way, the way concussive works is if a weapon with a concussive causes a wound, even if it is saved, if the wound was caused, then at the end of the phase, that squad takes a leadership test, and if that leadership test is failed, then that squad, that unit, loses 1 weapon skill until the end of the next assault phase. Now, if this was an ability where you tested on it at the end of every unit's attack, so like let's say I had 2 squads of despoilers, and each squad of despoilers had 8 shotguns in it, or 4 shotguns in it, or whatever, and I managed to cause 1 wound with the first squad, and then I caused 1 wound with the second squad. Now, if this check was taken at the end of every shooting attack, so then I could force the opponent, whichever I'm shooting at, to take 2 checks on their leadership. That would be awesome. However, because concussive happens only at the end of the phase, it doesn't matter if I cause 35 wounds to that squad or if I cause 1 wound to that squad. They still have the exact same chance of passing that concussive test. So there is absolutely no benefit to spam them entirely, especially when you're likely to cause more wounds by including, in this example, a stub carbine instead. Ultimately, my example here then is what I think you should do is when you're in an auto or las, when you're not auto rifle or las gun squad, which is a unit that you maybe wants to pull back a little bit, stand on a mid to backboard level, objective or something, take all the heavy stubbers you can in that squad because it's going to allow you to actually get something out of the increased range. For any squad that you're going to want to charge with, I would mix in at least 4 shotguns into that squad and then stub carbines for the rest. And this is the maximum efficiency for damage that you can do within 12 inches. And when you have 4 shotguns, presuming ballistic skill 4 and toughness 4, you have almost 100% chance, or you can pretty much guarantee that you're going to cause 1 wound. And if that's the case, then you're going to ensure that you're causing that 1 concussive check. The biggest problem, of course, is that leadership 8, which is the basic leadership that almost everything Marine-based with a sergeant has, you have a 72% chance to pass that leadership test, so you can't count on concussive occurring. But then again, you don't have to work that hard to guarantee that someone has to take the test. So, if you really want to make sure, if you want to be certain that you're causing as many as possible, you can go 6 or 8 shotguns in a squad if you really need to. Mathematically speaking, you should only need 4. Some of my friends, I know how you roll dice, so some of you are probably already thinking, yeah, I'm going to go with 6. Totally fine and totally makes sense. The biggest thing is, I think heavy stubbers work really well when optimizing a squad that is going to be using auto rifles and las guns, and then the stub carbines and the shotguns work really, really, really well together. Now, for weapons of desperation, this is only one of the oaths that you can take, so then you got to start thinking about which other possible oaths you're going to take alongside this. The biggest problem is, as I mentioned at the start of this, there are not a lot of oaths that do a super great job of synergizing with shooting armies for the Blackshields, and so your options for optimized synergy are few and far between. One that works is In Disgrace, All Are Equal, and this is the one where you can't take any HQ choices, but all of your sergeants get a little bit stronger, and they get 1 more wound, leadership, and they also can have 1 more of any skill, including ballistic skill, so, I don't know, theoretically they're shooting better with their stub carbines, I guess. This is a really small game impact, and I don't know that I'd necessarily recommend it to optimize in this way. Narratively, it's still pretty cool, but it's not going to have a huge effect size on your game. Now, the Legacy of Nikeah has a psychic shooting attack that goes along with this, with its oath, and so, you could double up on shooting attacks in that regard. Use your cool psychic power and just a ton of stub carbines and whatever. But again, not a huge improvement on either, but it does really lean into that shooting emphasis. The one thing, of course, is that the Legacy of Nikeah does have the downside of potentially killing your own troops when you shoot your guns, so I definitely shoot my stub carbines or auto guns first, and then do the psychic power, just so you can get the most out of things. There are, however, some oaths that are just genuinely not good to put together here. Twisted Helix, the aberrant variety, 100% is bad news for you, because the aberrant variety has you lose a ballistic skill, so it will dramatically reduce the effectiveness of the offensive output of your little Uzis and whatever else for your stub carbines. And then the clone variant of the same variety stops reactions, and I mean, you want to have shooting reactions with this. You want to throw your buckets of dice as often as possible. So I think this is definitely a no-go. Similarly, Flesh is Weak has no reactions associated with it, which is too bad because the Feel No Pain that is associated with that one and having extra shooting stuff might have made for a cool combination to allow you to be a little bit tougher on objectives, But again, taking yourself out of the reaction concept of the game seems like a bad thing to do. Also, one of the other, I would say, minor effects or narrative oaths that I'm not going to recommend a lot of other places is specifically bad here because Eternity of War has like a unique focus on winning close combats, but every round that you're not in close combat, you can be losing models. And so if you're trying to stand back and shoot, your guys are just dying because they're not in close combat. That is a direct oppositional force in that regard. What do I think of Weapons of Desperation now, though? I think it's pretty good. I think it feels fun, and it definitely has a super unique way of going into the game. I do really, really wish, I did say this before, that this was just a war gear option for all Blackshields as opposed to an oath that you have to opt into and therefore miss out on other stuff, but here we are, and it's fine. We're going to take a little moment to segue into something else. The podcast and YouTube channel has been going for over a year and a half now, and I really do appreciate all the support that I've been receiving. In January, we opened up a Patreon, and I've been really appreciative for the small group of folks that have, supported in that way, because adding that little bit of extra support helps me cover the bills that come, honestly, with running this sort of hobby thing, which I'm happy to do for everybody. But I really appreciate that extra support. As a way of trying to thank those extra dedicated supporters of the channel, what I've decided to do is I'm going to start releasing regular videos for Patreons only. And at the same time, or right about the same time that this video comes out, there is going to be another Blackshields video, which does more of what you just heard as far as the Armaments of Desperation. Some people, not all people, really like to dig into the numbers of things and really understand how something is going to impact the game. I find that it's really useful, both if you're trying to think about the optimization of the game, but also to think about the best ways to make your narrative something that works the way you want to on the table. Spend time to think about these combinations. So like I said, the video that will be posted for Patreons is going to be a video kind of about our next topics, the next two subjects as we move on, talking about a specific and detailed look at the combinations of the Twisted Helix and the Penopoly of Old oaths. This is something that I talked about in my first video, as I tagged it as being super important and powerful of a combination. And, because Penopoly of Old involves options that, you can choose the war gear of any of the 18 legions, I've gone through and dug through and done some math on just about all of them, talking about which ones I think are best, the best way to use them all. And like I said, that is on YouTube just for Patreons. So if you're interested, please check out our Patreon. And if you're one of our Patreon supporters, I hope you enjoy this. Put a lot of time into this other video as well. And it's all for you, dudes. Thanks much. Okay, back to it. So let's get into the Twisted Helix. And here's the overarching view of it. Twisted Helix, all the models lose Fury, Heart, and Spite of the Legion and the Inexorable rules. Instead, you gain access to one of two rules, the Clone or the Aberrant special rule. In addition, this is something that cannot be overlooked. Opposing players cannot score objectives off removing these models. This alone is pretty big. I've mentioned this before. It basically negates an entire way of scoring in the game, which is very strong. So there are two varieties, and one I'm really a big fan of, and one I think is pretty bad. Clones cause you to lose one initiative, one leadership. You cannot make reactions, but you also cannot be pinned, and you do have a 5+ feel no pain like damage resistance that is still still can't function against instant death attacks. The other option is the Aberrant special rule, which has you losing one ballistic skill, one leadership, but you gain one strength, and you get an additional +1 strength on the charge, but you must charge something if you're within 12 inches. Aberrant specifically notes that this does not count against characters, so it will not go against your sergeants or your HQs. So for the clone variety, I don't like this. Your Feel No Pain, your clone damage mitigation, is no better than regular Feel No Pain, and you can simply buy an apothecary to simulate the effects of this on top of it. Now, you are going to be paying for that apothecary. I get that. I just don't think it is as big of a benefit as you want it to be. Losing initiative is huge here because against other Marines, which is most of what you're going to be facing, you're striking after them. In close combat, you are going to be losing models before you get a chance to strike. Your Feel No Pain 5+ might be enough to help you weather that, but in most situations, it cannot. Your no reactions is a big problem in this game because reactions are one of the more dynamic and interesting ways that a person can cause their opponent to double check or double think about what they want to do. So, I mean, like, if they don't have to do that because you can't react, then that's an entire tool that you have not, well, you can't make them think this way. I don't like this. I don't like this one at all. I don't really see the benefit. If you were just looking for a Feel No Pain and you're still going to be losing reactions, honestly, in some situations, I think another one, the Flesh is Weak, might just be better in general. The one thing here is that the clones still do not count for victory points when they die, so that's something at least. Okay, the Aberrant, though, is huge. +1 strength means that you are wounding on a 3+ with Shred if your model has a chainsword. Now, with Aberrant, if you charge, this will take your strength up even higher, and so base Marine charging now as Aberrant has a strength 6, which means wounding on a 2+. Again, if you've got Shred, this is really wild. Now, as mentioned before, there are essentially 2 toughness points, which you really got to pay attention to in Horus Heresy 2.0. How you do against toughness 4, and how you do against toughness 7. On a charge, a regular Marine is wounding a Dreadnought at a 5+ with a Shred reroll, which is pretty great. Now, one big problem here is the Aberrant rule causes you to lose a point of ballistic skill. This is very much going to impact a lot of your anti-tank, because you don't have any fancy Legion-specific troops. You don't have any like fancy exotic melee, which is going to be super extra good at tearing up tanks. You're going to be limited to, whatever comes basic. And so missing a little bit more often is going to be a problem. Less problem, though, if you are taking this in an allied attachment, your primary is going to handle more of that anti-tank, anti-vehicle thing. The leadership issue, which is worse, you still are losing -1. You're still having -1 leadership on your regular squad guys, but because this rule does not apply to the characters do not lose their leadership, and so the sergeants still have their regular leadership. So as long as your sergeants stay alive, you are essentially the same leadership as anybody else. Because you don't give up points, you can very happily throw them into combats which are a little bit dicey, and feel good about sacrificing them in melee so they just churn up the opponent a little bit, even if you know you're not going to win, to delay them because you're not going to be giving up any points for objectives or whatever else. Also, unintentionally, they successfully nerfed Dreadnoughts because -1 ballistic skill here is going to make the unbelievably stupid and effective Melta-Cannon, which is ridiculously underpriced, just a little bit worse. And on top of that, the charging strength bonuses just don't matter because the melee weapon for a Dreadnought, Contemptor, and... oh god, now I gotta check for Leviathan. Yes, the Leviathan and Contemptor melee weapons are a set strength, so charging, adding bonuses will not affect how strong those melee attacks hit. So yes, we've done it. We have an effective nerf against Dreadnoughts in the Blackshields, if you take them as Aberrants. Yes, good job, GW. Alright, enough with the applause. Now, as far as synergies go, and I'm going to be honest, I'm talking just about the Aberrants here because I'm done thinking about the clones. There are potentials for major synergies between the Penopoly of old, depending on what war gear you can get access to, the Eternal Vendetta having an additional +1 to hit in certain circumstances, and of course, also interestingly enough, Pride is our armor, because you're going to be cutting down on having so many troops and being able to spend more points on elites. And veterans, as noted in the beginning, are one of the only units in the game that you can get weapon skill 5 on, and so they are significantly better in this situation for the awesome melee power that you have on the wounding, because of course, it doesn't matter how easy it is to wound if you can't hit in the first place. I would like to point out that there's some top meme potential here in Disgrace All Are Equal. Your sergeants get better. They get +1 to 1 stat and +1 wound, but you lose an additional leadership, and so your regular aberrant Marines are going to be running around at leadership 5, which is objectively funny, but not good, but it's funny. In addition, there's some other negative synergies that associate with this. Armament of desperation, because your weapon skill is what you're really relying on, and your ballistic skill you're kind of tossing to the wind. So spending the other oath on getting cool guns is an anti-synergy, similar to Taint of Xenos for exactly the same reasons. As stated, the other video for Patreons is going to be breaking down just how insane some of these combinations can get with the Penopoly of Old, because some of the war gear, when you're already adding potentially a +2 strength onto your models, then any additional adjustments and tweaks are really going to take this power level through the roof. So look for that, Patreons, on the, linked on your Patreon page. And that's as good a segue as any into the Penopoly of Old. We'll start talking about this rule and how it sort of connects and works. Penopoly of Old gives access to one Legion's war gear and war gear only. It's not anything else. It is not unit upgrades that provide war gear. So, for example, if you were to take the Iron Hands Penopoly of Old, you would not get access to Iron Fathers, but you could get access to Cyber Familiars. In addition, you can actually apply this oath twice. You can take war gear from 2 different legions if you want to. The biggest focus for us here, then, is to think about how this works, but the best ways to apply it. And so I've sort of tried to divide it into who can actually benefit. Some legions have war gear that apply to every single model in the legion, and some are only for characters, and some are even more exclusive, only for independent characters. So who's getting the benefit? Your everyday rank and file fellas, the sergeants, and the characters, or is it just your HQ choices? To keep this from becoming a full 3-hour video, we're just going to do a brief overview of some of the highlights for the whole thing, okay? Now, obviously, there are 18 legions, and there are 18 different options that you can choose between that have impressive war gear, in some ways more than others, but I'm going to focus on 5 right here, with an honorable mention to 1 more. So, 6. Yeah, I can count. So, because they're basically the poster boys of this edition, we're going to start with, I guess, the Imperial Fists. And they have a ton of different war gear, and some of it is really special and unique for them. The Vigil Storm Shield can be granted to independent characters or models in either Tartaros or Cataphracti Terminator armor. So it's 20 points to give it to an independent character that is not unique, and that can be Artificer armor. I think I should point that out. In addition, if you're in models are either in a Tartaros Terminator squad or a Tartaros Command squad, or a Cataphracti Terminator squad or a Cataphracti Command squad, they can exchange their combi bolters for Vigil Storm Shields. It's only 10 points for the Cataphracti squad, and it's 15 points for the Tartaros. So 3+ invulnerable save is nothing to scoff at, and notably it replaces your gun, so you're still going to be able to use your close combat weapons, which is pretty great, especially considering that you have an additional bonus, a war gear that you can take here, which is the Solarite Power Gauntlet. The Solarite Power Gauntlet is an extra special Power Fist. It strikes at strength 10 instead of strength times 2. It's AP 1, but it's also melee and unwieldy. So AP 1, strength 10 is pretty fantastic. It does not double your strength, however. So some of the other shenanigans that you can do with Blackshields involving, maxing out or increasing strength, you're not going to get the full benefit here, which is fine. In addition, it's only 5 points more for a Solarite when compared to a Power Fist or just a straight swap with a Thunderhammer. There are definitely some situations where I can see taking a Solarite Power Gauntlet over a Thunderhammer. Strength 10 AP 1 is much better against vehicles, for instance, but not nearly as strong against other Terminators or, Dreadnoughts, for example, because you're missing out on that Brutal. But it's still a really, really good upgrade. Now, you're going to end up, if you're going to use both of these items, you're going to end up spending a lot of points extra on these squads. And it's not that this isn't worth it, but it's very specifically targeting, essentially, like your special characters or your Terminator squads. But that's not all that the Imperial Fists get. They also get the Elastius Assault Cannon, which is a Strength 6, AP 4, Assault 4, Rending 6+ gun at a 24-inch range. It's got the Malfunction special rule so that if you use a reaction with it, it gains Get Hot. So it's like a little bit worse in reactions, but it's a pretty decent gun also. It counts as an auto gun, importantly. Well, importantly for Imperial Fists, because that means they get a +1 to hit with it. It doesn't mean anything to you here because you're not an Imperial Fist. You're just borrowing their stuff. You can take one of these in exchange for a heavy flamer for an additional 10 points, which is a lot of points. In addition, you can put them on Predators. You can also put them on Dreadnoughts, but again, they're expensive. Now, this isn't, in my opinion, the coolest war gear that the Imperial Fists are going to grant your Blackshields. The coolest thing is that for 25 points, you can allow any Cataphracti Terminator Squad, Tartaros Terminator Squad, or Command Squads of either variety to deep strike. And that's pretty great. You also, though, have to buy it for 20 points for any independent character as well. So if you're going to deep strike a character with a unit, then I believe that means you're going to need 45 points. I'm going to have to check on that. Yep, I had one of those senior moments, but I couldn't remember which rules actually confer to whole units and which don't. But the rulebook states that deep strike does need to be, everyone in the unit needs to have it. So I'm fine now. We're fine here. How are you? Especially if you're going to lean into Terminators or do a couple of these, this in an allied detachment, I suppose, or honestly a main detachment. This would be pretty cool. The biggest thing, of course, with deep strike assaults is that you kind of need to go at least a little bit full tilt into it. Deep striking one unit with the amount of interceptor that most likely will be out there almost always guarantees that whatever you brought onto the board is going to get absolutely torn up for free. So you kind of need to invest in this strategy. So if you're looking at 3 independent characters in Terminator armor, all deep striking, plus whatever squads they're going to go with, then you're looking at 135 points just to deep strike. Not terrible, all told, but, it is a fair chunk. I mean, if you were going to put them in a drop pod, which drop pods are terrible now, but if you're going to put them in a drop pod or separate drop pods, you spend more points there. So you're still saving points there. The biggest downside, and, just quickly moving on so we can get through this, the biggest downside is that the Imperial Fist rules, because they specifically target Terminators and because they specifically target those squads with all of their upgrades. You got a lot of expensive upgrades, but ultimately you're putting them on units that only have weapon skill 4, because once again, none of these upgrades apply towards veterans, and veterans are the only spammable unit in your list as a Blackshield that you can reliably get 5+ or 5 weapon skill on. Otherwise, it's Dreadnoughts. And so this upgrade is potentially really powerful, really cool, would be really cool in small amounts, but I think it would crumble in a larger list because you would be trying to be a melee army that doesn't have very effective melee. There are other upgrades as well. You do have the cool Ferromag shotguns, which I've discussed in my Siege of Cathonia review when I was discussing that before. I thought they were kind of a side grade. They definitely have slightly more offensive capabilities, but they lack the concussive, which you might want. So ultimately, I would say that, there's definitely a lot of options, a lot of customization that you can put here, but not necessarily a top level for me. Now, Sons of Horus are another one that's interesting. They do have a ton of different upgrades, and some of the upgrades are really, really sweet. Now, one thing it's important to note is that the best melee upgrade that the Imperial Fist had was that specialized Power Fist, which any model which had a Power Fist could then replace the Solar Ray Gauntlet with it, which is great, but not a lot of models get access to those Power Fists. However, the Carceran Power Axe, or in fact the Power Tabar, which is the other cool power weapon upgrade that the Sons of Horus have, anybody who can take a power weapon can take one of these. So right away, there's a lot more applicable space for that because you can have extra power weapons sitting in like despoiler squads, assault squads, obviously veteran squads, obviously any Terminator. So there's a lot more places for these upgrades to go. So let's talk about the ones in here. The Carceran Power Axe is a strength user, AP3, melee, breaching 5+, and specialist weapon. So some of the reasons why this is pretty good. The main thing is that it's an AP3 weapon with a breaching on a 5 that strikes at initiative. So that means that you can actually have a chance to kill other Terminator equivalents before they get a chance to strike you, which is awesome. Breaching on only a 5+ is not so great, and it is a specialist weapon, meaning you're never going to get a +1 attack, which is one of the reasons why I would almost never take the Carsoran Power Axe, and instead I'd be taking the Carsoran Power Tabar. So the Power Tabar is, it was new in the Siege of Cathonia book, as I said also before, and it's a +1 strength AP3 melee breaching 4 up two-handed. So there's a couple things to note. Some people I've seen are not happy about the fact that it's two-handed. When compared with the Carsoran Power Axe, this is considerably better still, because the Carsoran Power Axe was a specialist weapon, so you were never going to get an extra attack anyway. You might as well go the two-handed route for the same price and get a better breaching, get a better strength, and you're still striking at initiative. Like I said, AP3, but a breaching 4 up means that you're going to be causing AP2 wounds theoretically 50% of the time, right? Now, one of the things that's important to note here is that breaching is different from rending, because a rending roll, if you hit that rend, it doesn't matter the toughness of the target that you're attacking or the strength of the user that is wielding the weapon. If you hit that rend target, the wound goes through at AP2. Breaching, you still have to be able to wound for the breaching to take effect. So if we were, striking with the Carsoran Power Axe and we were breaching on a 5 up, but we were striking against something that was above our strength. So standard Marine with a strength 4, swinging against a Contemptor or something where it's toughness 7. Just because the breaching goes off on a 5+, it doesn't wound normally on a 5. You need to have a 6 for strength 6, for strength 4 against toughness 7. So it would only cause that breach on a 6 up. So this is definably better than that. The question becomes, though, is it better than other options? So you're giving up an entire oath for this Sons of Horus Armory. And yeah, the Power Tabar is great if it's already a built-in option. But if you're just trying to acquire this just so you can get this item, is it significantly better than just like a Power Axe? Well, a Power Axe, by comparison, it wounds the same number of times or the same amount of times because it's a strength +1. Just like the Power Axe, the Carsoran Power. When comparing it to a Power Axe, the Carsoran Power Tabar has the same strength modifier. So the biggest difference, of course, is that the Power Axe is AP2 and strikes last with Unwieldy. Now, the Power Tabar does get to strike an initiative at AP3 with the breaching. So against some things, like, for example, other Terminators or anything with a Power Fist or a Thunderhammer, theoretically, the Carsoran Power Tabar has the ability to cause wounds and remove models before those things can strike. Against something like a Contemptor, which is striking an initiative anyway, there is no benefit whatsoever. The other thing, of course, is that the Power Axe is not limited by being two-handed. It is, you can get an extra attack with it by having a bolt pistol. So that's an additional bit of offensive capability that really can stack and add up. You just have to wait until the bottom of the order to get it done. Is it a nice option, the Carsoran Power Tabar? Yes. Because it's breaching, you are also still theoretically gaining the benefit of using the aberrant special rules here, so it's definitely something to think about. But honestly, for my money, if you're just looking at this upgrade, this is not a good enough reason, I think, to take the Armory of the Sons of Horus as your oath. Now, you do get a shooting upgrade as well, the Banestrike Bolters, and the Banestrike Bolters are interesting. The biggest thing here is, once again, like honestly most of the rest of this Sons of Horus war gear, it's locked behind certain types getting access to it. Banestrike Bolters can be purchased by independent characters for 5 points apiece, or Sons of Horus Seeker Squads. Seeker Squads if you were going to take them in Blackshields, which, by the way, Seeker Squads I think are usually kind of overlooked in a lot of makeups. I actually really enjoy Seeker Squads. I think their standard Kraken Bolters are pretty great. So you can buy them for 2 points apiece. And also, veteran squads can exchange bolters for Banestrike bolters for 2 points a model. So that one is one place where that's pretty great. A Banestrike bolter only has 18-inch range at rapid fire. So if you want to double tap, you got to be at 9 inches. Strength 5, AP 4, and Breaching 6+. So that is actually a pretty nice stat line. Honestly, the Strength 5 is great on its own. Throwing in the Breaching is pretty good also, even if it is only on a 6+. Because you are putting these, theoretically, the place that I'd be most interested in doing it is onto veterans. And the veterans would be, because the veterans would be able to charge after shooting their rapid fire weapons. So that is an appealing option here for certain builds, potentially. The biggest thing, of course, is, one of the big boogeymen here, one of the big rules to consider, of course, is the aberrant thing. And anything that reduces your ballistic skill is going to make this upgrade seem a little bit worse. So if that was the route you were going to go, then I definitely would count. Honestly, I would probably count most of the Sons of Horus out in general. Not saying that there aren't useful applications here for the Sons of Horus Penopoly of old, but there are definitely, you can already see some combinations that are going to be a little bit less effective for them than others. The next one is, I guess, I'm not terribly surprised, but maybe just a little bit. One that I have not seen many people talk about so far, about the Penopoly of old. One of the options that I do like is actually the Iron Warriors for this, because the Iron Warriors have one ranged upgrade and one melee upgrade, and both of them have potential uses. So the first thing is the Olympian shrapnel weapons, and these are just bolter variations, and essentially what they do is they're going to just drop the range that you can fire at by a little bit, and then add pinning to your attacks. So this is not free, but it is an option that is available to every bolter or bolt pistol or essentially heavy bolter in your army, and for only 2 points a weapon, which is really cheap. So the main one that you'll see most often, I suppose, the main two are the shrapnel bolters and the shrapnel pistols. So a shrapnel bolter, when compared to a regular bolter, it has the same strength. It has no AP value, a max range of 18 inches instead of 24. It has rapid fire, as said, and it also has pinning. Shrapnel pistols are the same stat line, strength 4, AP dash, but range 10 inches, and pistol 1 and pinning. So that's pretty good, honestly. Being able to put a pinning check on basically every unit that you could put on the board is actually not something to scoff at. I don't think it's bad to at least consider. And as said, it's cheap. 2 points per model is not terrible. Independent characters get them for free, actually. So there you go. If you were just going to run a bolt pistol, might as well take a bolt pistol that is a little closer range, but it can get pinning. Now, the other option is also pretty interesting, which are a class of Graviton Crushers, which are basically just power maces that all have haywire. So the Graviton Mace is a power mace, essentially, but instead of any modification to strength, it's strength user, AP3, melee, and haywire. A Graviton Crusher is strength +2, AP2, melee, unwieldy, two-handed, and haywire. And then the Graviton Maul, which is Blackshields will only be able to take in place of a Power Fist, +2 strength, AP2, melee, brutal 2, and haywire. And I should have been more specific because the upgrade actually says it can only be used to replace a Gravis Power Fist, which is, of course, the weapon that a Contemptor Dreadnought comes stock with. So for Blackshields, the only place you're going to see these is on Contemptor Dreadnoughts. Now, sadly, unfortunately, you can't just put these on any model. This is only for characters, so you can't just give like an entire veteran squad of melee haywire hammers, because that would be awesome. But you can give them, the Graviton Mace is just the same points as a power weapon would be. The Graviton Crusher is the same points as a Thunder Hammer would be. And the Graviton Maul is an upgrade for a Power Fist by 15 points. So the one that I really like for this, honestly, is the Graviton Mace more than anything, because if you just put this on squad sergeants, then you've got a chance to do 1-2 potentially wounds on a dreadnought if it mobs your squad. So, I mean, you can do some chip damage there, and that's not bad. The Graviton Crusher, as far as swapping it out for a Thunderhammer, I don't particularly like this as much, but the Graviton Mace is a pretty cool option. Now, is it better than any of the other ones? Not necessarily, but it does add utility, a fair amount of utility, and honestly, they'd be fun to model. being chosen by me is that both of them have melee options that are available to basically any model in your army. So, starting with the Space Wolves. The Space Wolves have actually 3 upgrades. 2 of them are tagged towards independent characters. The first is Aether Rune Armor, which is definitely kind of interesting, but basically what happens is you exchange Artificer Armor for Aether Rune for an additional 25 points. You still get a 2+ armor save. You add a wound to your model, which is pretty great, and then you get Adamantium Will 4+. Situational, pretty good. Definitely in character for Space Wolves, maybe less so in a Blackshields army, but it's an option, so we should talk about it. The next up are the Frostblades, and these are... I don't care for these. I don't care for any of these particularly, but any model that with Space Wolves independent character can exchange a power weapon for a Frost Blade for 5 points, or a Great Frost Blade for 10. So Frost Blades are the Frost Sword, Claw, and Axe, and they are essentially just power weapon variants. The sword and the axe give you a +1 strength. The Frost Sword has an AP 3. The Frost Axe has an AP 2. The Frost Claw has an AP 3 as well. Basically, all of these are more or less exactly like their power equivalents, except for the fact that the Frost Sword loses the rending 6+ that power swords now get. Instead, you get Reaping Blow. The Frost Axe gains Reaping Blow. And like the Lightning Claw that it's modeled after, the Frost Claw also has Shred, as you would expect. The biggest thing is that all 3 of the regular Frost Blades are specialist weapons, so you're never getting an additional attack for having 2 weapons, which makes the Reaping Blow 1 sort of silly, in my opinion, because you could just do the same thing and get the additional attack without the operant needing to be in base-to-base with more than 1 model, unless you're able to buy a second specialist weapon, which seems sort of silly. I don't rate these. The Great Frost Blade is melee, Reaping Blow 1, and 2-handed. It's not specialist, but it's 2-handed, so you can't get an additional attack. Strength +2, AP 2. None of these are particularly great. The option that is good is the Fenrisian Axe, or the one that's worth talking about. Any model that has, any of your Blackshields with this Penopoly of Old can exchange their chain sword for an axe, for Fenrisian Axe for 2 points. You gain +1 strength, you have melee, and you lose Shred, so you're not rerolling wounds, but you are getting Reaping Blow. So again, potentially an extra attack. The big thing here is the Fenrisian Axe doesn't have specialists, so your despoilers with Fenrisian Axes are potentially gaining an additional attack depending on how they're put on the board. You lose Shred, but you gain +1 strength, which will help the overall conversion into wounds. Is it fantastic? No, but it's super fluffy, flavorful, and most importantly, like I said, it's available to everybody, so it's going to have a huge impact potentially on your army, depending on how you want to look at it. Now, the flip side of that, and probably the superior option if we're looking at mass adoption of items, is the World Eater's Armory, which just has the chain axes. Any World Eater, or in our situation, Blackshield, can just swap out a chain sword for a chain axe for free. It's basically just grants you a +1 strength. And I say basically as if it's a small thing, but this is an absolutely huge benefit, and it's free. So it's absolutely wild not to consider it. Now, the other thing that's important to note, that is not the only upgrade that you can get from the World Eaters. There's also the Ravening Madman rule, but the big problem with this is it is a bonus that makes them wound more often, be wounded more often, but it also creates a problem because they can only join models with the Ravening Madman rule, and this can only be purchased in your Blackshields force by an independent character. So it is there's one unit within the World Eater's options that already has the Ravening Madman rule, so you would put this character with that unit, but you don't have access to Legion specific, so you just write this off entirely. So on top of the chain axes, which are great, there are also the Kadir weapons, which are gladiator weapons, and there's 4 different options, and these are tagged specifically for characters, and they are 15 points for an upgrade. So you swap a chain sword for one of these for 15 points. So it's approximately the point that you would spend on, well, it's how much you would spend on a Power Fist. As far as it goes, all of them are fine. They're at least decent. They're all the same amount of points, so you can interchange them for flavor, basically, without having any problems with point keeping. They're, like I said, they're all, like, fun, and they all have interesting rules, but the big standout is going to be the Phalanx Blades, which are Strength +1, Rending 4+, Duelist Edge +1, so you're getting that initiative bonus if you're in a challenge, and they are specialist weapons, but you get 2 of them for the 15 points. So, I mean, you're getting a +1 strength weapon with a Rending 4 up, and you're getting 2 attacks with it. It's absolutely fantastic. These weapons are, especially the Phalanx Blade, but any of them, are pretty great options for characters if you are doing the Aberrant rules. Phalanx Blade is in particular with a 4+ Rending striking at initiative or a +1 initiative in a challenge. The Aberrants don't gain their bonuses on Sergeants. So the additional strengths, bonuses, and whatever that is going to make your chain axes or power axes or whatever else weapons really, really amazing aren't going to apply. So you're still going to be looking for like a Power Fist equivalent, and this would be a cool way to do that. Got one honorable mention, but I want to include it as part of the 6 just because it's one that I'm really keen on, even if only because I think it's fun and also very fluffy and thematic. The rules that you get to access from the Emperor's Children are pretty interesting, I think, because even though they don't have any war gear that is universally applicable, meaning that every Legionnaire can pick it up, they do have several upgrades. Well, they've got the Surgical Augments, which are pretty great, and those can be picked up by Sergeant, and they have effects that matter for the whole party, for the whole unit. So the one that I love in particular is the Sonic Shrieker, which is a -1 weapon skill to opponents who charge your unit or when you charge something else. So that's a really impressive defensive buff, and it automatically triggers whether you are charged or they are charged. The Phoenix weapons, the Rapier and the Spears, they're not terrible. They standard are AP3. The Spears are a +2 strength as opposed to the user for the Rapiers. Both have Breaching 6+. Both are Murderous Strike. The Spear, though, has Reach 1, so additional initiative, and then also it's two-handed, so you don't get additional attacks. These are fine because, as upgrades for Sergeants. Unfortunately, you can't put these on Veterans. That would just be cool, but they have a squad that's just like that the actual Emperor's Children's can do, so maybe they think that's not necessary for your Blackshields. Like I said, I mean, I think it's interesting to consider and apply in this situation because that Sonic Shrieker buff's so good. Also, because there are lots of lore opportunities that would make a lot of sense considering the amount of genetic shenanigans that some of the Emperor's Children are up to. There's a lot of good story hooks to explain why your Blackshields might have this upgrade in particular, whether it's because you're pairing it with the Aberrant or something else entirely. To sum it up for Penopoly of Old, there are a lot of good options here, and I can see people using a lot of the different ones, even beyond the 6 that I specifically mentioned, but these are the ones that I think have potentially the most interesting play, whether that's because of straight up rules interest or just because, it's a cool lore possibility for you. The last one of the major benefits that I'm going to talk about here is the Flesh is Weak option, and it does give you a 5+ Feeling of Pain, which is pretty decent. The biggest thing the problem I have with this is that alone is not such a great benefit, in my opinion, that it's worth thinking about. You can accomplish this with other things, with additional units. A lot of other places get it in better ways. You also have this very strange shooting restriction where you have to shoot at whatever's closest to you, and if you get two units that are equal distance, you get to choose, but it simply says if you have something that's within range and you can shoot at it. So if you bring a heavy weapons team and you've got a las cannon squad with 48-inch range and your opponent drops a squad of scouts 4 inches away from you, guess what you're shooting at? That's not great. Now, you could limit this, of course, with the order that you choose to make your shooting attacks, hoping you can blow some stuff up the board or whatever, but you're effectively ceding a huge part of the control that you have over the flow of the game to your opponent, depending on how they manipulate their models on the board. I mean, yes, a good player can work around these to certain extents, but just like I mean, this effectively makes your screens for melee just as effective as your screens, as screens for shooting. Like, they're going to accomplish the same thing. You're going to have to shoot through everything on the board in between you and whatever specific juicy target you want to fire at. It's not good. It's not good at all. Now, you do get a couple benefits, and you can put more models into, transports. I don't think that's good. I don't think that's good at all. The one thing that I think you can see doing here is, I mean, depending on the way you put the list together, just make sure you're not taking any heavy weapons anyway. Like, if you were just going to put this on all short-range weaponry, so it's not really something that's going to affect you that much, because you weren't going to have as many options anyhow. That would be fine, I suppose. But again, it's a whole oath that is replaceable by an apothecary, and you still get to react, because the automata type that you gain, you lose the ability to react. So you're losing that huge part of the economy of the game. So it just goes to show you, having a major effect on the board doesn't mean good, because this is very, very negative. It's too bad, really, because there are cool stories about this exact sort of thing. The Iron Hands get into a sort of situation where they start, turning themselves into just zombie robots, which is fun and would be a fun thing to represent on the board. Too bad that representing that lore moment on the board isn't going to cost you a significant amount of, effectiveness. Now, moving into the moderate effects here, and we're going to go through these very quickly. But Eternal Vendetta is it's a good ability. It's the ability to have +1 to hit against a specific legion. The one thing is that unless you've come up with a really interesting lore perspective to explain why you're going to change this from moment to moment, it's an oath that's really only going to be effective in specific matches. Now, if you're a sort of person who just has like one or two opponents that you play against, this is a gold mine for lore because, your guys hate your best buddies guys so much that you get a +1 to hit, or, it's because of betrayal sort of thing, like loyalist world eaters versus traitor world eaters, that sort of thing. A +1 to hit as a bonus is huge. It's extremely effective, and especially in this edition, when weapon skill has changed to a point that there is a specifically important point to hit with his weapon skill 5, right? You really need to hit weapon skill 5 so that you can get a 3+ to hit against most of the other things in the game, or a 4+ against other unique units. I did the math before, and for example, Veteran Squad with no invulnerable save but weapon skill 5 survives better against a Contemptor Dreadnought than a Terminator Squad with a 4+ invulnerable save, because Brutal is so destructive. The best defense is not getting hit. So being hit on a 3 versus hitting on a 4 is a dramatic thing that you can do. Now, for the offensive side then, being able to go up against a higher weapon skill and hit on a 4, even if you're being hit just as frequently on the other side of things, being able to push out that offensive power with an additional +1 is absolutely huge. Definitely recommended in certain situations, but if you're bringing an all-comer sort of list, or if you're going to go to a convention, for example, or an event, the narrative will be cool, but it won't give you as much to do. There are several games where it just won't even come up entirely, so not a recommend for all of them, but in specific situations, for sure. Spoils of Victory, I mean, this one potentially is absolutely huge for a couple of reasons. One of which is that a +1 victory point at the end of every combat in which you cause a leadership test to fail is potentially awesome. There are a lot of games that end up swinging on 1 or 2 points, so being able to pick 1 or 2 of these up and winning a game could be really, really powerful. It's also really fluffy, really thematic, and fun. On top of that, because of the way the Blackshields rules work, and I've talked about this a lot before, so just going to go through it quickly again here, because of the fact that they are distrusted allies if you take them as allies, or if you take them in your main force, your whatever allied force you are bringing along with the Blackshields cannot ever score objectives, you're always going to be short on objective scoring power if Blackshields are part of your force. So this is one of the ways that you can actually have an allied Blackshield detachment score points for you, which is fantastic. You are probably going to bring them, hopefully, just as a small to medium level, melee threat if you didn't have it in your main force. So having them be able to pick up 1 or 2 odd victory points in the course of the game is fantastic. It's really good. Legacy of Nikeah is an interesting one because I think it's one of the few oaths here that actually becomes better when you take it specifically in a main detachment as opposed to as an ally because of the special abilities that come with it. So all of your squads can be effectively psychers, and your sergeant in your psyker squad will have the ability to shoot a psychic power that if you kill or take wounds on some of your own models, the psychic power goes off with a better effect, and so it's more effective in that regard. That's fine. It's not like great, but one of the things also that you can get in this is that basically any independent character can just be a psyker as well as something else, so you just pay for that upgrade on top of things. So you can have chaplain librarians, you can have Moritat librarians, you can have, all sorts of stuff. And in this way, because in a main detachment, you still get 3 of those HQ spots as opposed to the allied detachment where you can only get 1, you can see where that extra stacking bonus sort of thing turns out much better in a Blackshields list where you are using this as a main detachment. Other than that, Legacy of Nikeah is kind of middle of the road, I think. There are definitely some interesting combinations when you pair that with other things. Like most other things in this book, like going with the aberrant subtype, it just makes so many of your things so much stronger. Also, it makes them not worth any victory points for dying, so if you're just killing your own guys to make those psychic attack powers faster, you have to worry a little bit less about that mattering because you're not giving them those victory points. Also, the fact that you've got these guys that are already kind of a little bit souped up, and then you can add certain psychic powers on top of them to make them even stronger, it's a tantalizing option. But like I said, this one is a little bit better, I think, for bigger forces, or the forces where you have more HQ slots so that you can do more shenanigans. But that's just an idea. In Disgrace, All Are Equal and Pride is Our Armor are both ones that I've seen people talk a lot about, and they're alike in a couple different ways. You can pair these together and basically just taking all elites and having all of your sergeants be slightly better with 1 more wound and 1 more of a various different stat. You could totally do that. That would probably be fine. It definitely would be fun and fluffy. Both of them, however, I think are better, again, because you can put them into, if you put them into an allied position. The reason why, in Disgrace, All Are Equal, this is the one that gets rid of your HQs, but all your sergeants get better, while all your regular squad members get a little worse. By getting rid of all the characters, again, if you only have 1 slot to lose because it's an allied detachment, then you're not really losing as much. So that's great. And Pride is Our Armor by being able to take, veterans. If you put this in an allied detachment, and you are skipping the troop tax, and then you can focus just more on veteran squads if that's what you're interested in. That's pretty great for a couple of reasons. Now, one of the things is Pride is Our Armor, as we've talked about, and I really want to accentuate this, because your Blackshields aren't going to score, you don't have to buy them a line if they're your allied troops, so you don't have to spend that on them. And, a veteran sergeant with a +1 weapon skill is going to be striking the same as a Praetor with weapon skill 6. Which is pretty nice. That's pretty great. Definitely something fun to consider. Lastly, the narrative flare. Only in death does duty end is definitely a meme that is, it lives, it is a meme that needs a dream. It's a meme that needs a board someplace, somewhere. I just don't think it was very good, because I think you can just effectively win combat by just effectively winning combat with a bunch of these other oaths. And so adding extra wounds on top of, or extra points on top of the combat resolution by taking wounds and shooting attacks is fine. It's not great. Taint of Xenos, those guns are all bad. And I'm not going to elaborate on that further. I just don't think they're very good. If you have a story that goes along with it, though, you are free to explore it. But that oath will not provide any sort of benefit for you, in my opinion. So it's really funny looking at this, and I've got to edit it, of course, but right now as it sits with lots of breaks, at one point Hazel got up in the middle of the night and was very thirsty, so she took like a 45-second lap of water. I think some of that made it into the final edit. We'll see. This is sitting at about an hour and 20 minutes already. what's funny to me about this is that essentially there are a few oaths that require a lot of thought. Those ones we talked about quite a bit. We talked about Broken Helix, we talked about Weapons of Desperation, Penopoly of Old, because they have a lot of combinations. And I only dipped into the surface on Penopoly. The Flesh is Weak. I said more there than I probably needed to. I really think it's not good, and I think it will frustrate you if you try to play it. To each their own. The major effects, as I described them, are all really powerful, even if not like powerful in a good way. They just will have a huge impact on the way your game plays. And the moderate effects also still can have a huge impact on like the way your board works or whatever, but it may or may not swing much in your favor. I still think that obviously Broken Helix, Penopoly of Old are really awesome options, but there's so much flavor in these oaths, in this oath system. It's really, really fantastic. The modeling opportunities. It feels like every character, every model is going to end up being a work of art in some of these armies if you take the time for it. I'm still really tempted by In Disgrace, All Are Equal. I don't know that I've got a plan for it. I don't know that I've got a story for it yet, but it sounds really cool, and I really want to make that one work. Pride is Our Armor, less so, but the combination is tempting, but there's lots of different things that you can look for in this. As I mentioned way back, this is also an opportunity because I'm launching that other video for patrons only, where I get into much more of the math like you saw with the Broken Helix. Again, a good part of this video's runtime is just going to be me talking about autoguns and las guns, which is fine, and I enjoyed doing it. It was interesting to think about, but it's not everyone's cup of tea, and it takes a lot of time. So, like I said, there is a video breakdown of the same thing, roughly, that concept, but instead I'm looking at very specific combinations of Penopoly of Old and some of the other rules in here. So, as a teaser, I am going to break down that combination that I talked about with Legacy of Nikeah and Aberrant, and I am going to break down a couple of other options as well. But a lot of it's going to fit around that Aberrant concept and which concepts I think are mathematically best, but also lore fun and appropriate. Just as a hint, the one that I think is mathematically strongest is not the one I would run myself, because I don't think it's quite as much fun, but whatever. Okay, so that about wraps it up this time, and I really appreciate all of you for sticking around through this, and I hope you are enjoying digging through this book as much as I have been. This one took a while to get out. I'm hoping to get a little bit more rapid fire. I would love to see comments below if you would like to see me dig into Shattered Legions more specifically, or to work on the Solar Auxilia special rules that are part of this book, and to talk about how you can incorporate those into your already existing Marine forces. I think both of those sound like fun options. I'm guessing which one I would rather have it be in my head, but let's see what you all say. Like I said, if you haven't before, if you haven't already, like and subscribe. It really helps the algorithm and get people to notice this stuff. Please consider supporting us on Patreon. And the link for that below is going to be here. Give you a chance to listen to other cool video. We got to thank our patrons, of course. So Lone Monkey, Dark Apostle Ben, the Uptown Garage in Ankeny, Iowa, and of course Hobby Ogre, and also still have that affiliate deal for 10% off. The link is in the comments below, hobbyogre.com. Anyway, that's all for this time, and hope to talk to you soon. Thanks a lot.